Welcome to another episode of the Unitrans podcast. Today, we want to have a candid conversation about the infrastructure and regulatory realities shaping logistics across Africa. Progress on the continent is often shaped by structural challenges such as road quality, regulatory complexity, and uneven enforcement. Joining me in the discussion is CEO of the RFA, Gavin Kelly, and Consumer Executive, Gareth Jones. Please share with us who you are and the role you play within the broader logistics and industry ecosystem. We look forward to having a discussion around collaboration between industry, associations, and government as critical pathways to progress. Welcome. Gentlemen, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about yourselves and the roles that you play.
It's Gareth Jones. I'm the executive for the consumer division within the Unitrans business, and we look after end-to-end logistics across the supply chain that involves transport, warehousing, freight forwarding and clearing, as well as certain poultry aspects, specialised poultry unit that we look after.
So specialised poultry isn't a big turkey. My name is Gavin Kelly. I'm the Chief Executive at the Road Freight Association. The Road Freight Association is a private association. A lot of people think because of its acronym RFA, it is similar to the RAF and the FRA and the RMTC and all those sorts of things, which it isn't. It's made up of members who join it voluntarily. And we have two legs briefly. We have a trade leg, so we look after operational matters for our members. And then we have an employment style of leg, which looks after negotiations between the employer and the employee. So that's what the RFA is.
So the first question to you, gentlemen, is infrastructure and regulation are often cited as key constraints on efficiency. From your perspective, where do the most persistent operational challenges lie for logistics operators in Africa?
So we got 14 days to have an answer just to that first part of the question. It's a very good question because one, I suppose, in South Africa is quite ready to shoot from the hip and you start blaming government for what's going wrong. So the first thing we need to understand is probably the very backbone of logistics if you want to move something. And what drives the mode that you use, and that's the word that we find running around everywhere. So you have road, you have rail, you have sea, you have air. Those are called modes in the greater scheme of things. And what mode do you choose to move the goods or people? And generally it's around the efficiency of the mode. It's not always about how cheap that mode is. It's about how efficient it is. So dwell times, traveling times, etc. In South Africa, we're sitting with a problem where the only mode that's efficient really in terms of land-based transport is road. I'm not going to bring air and sea into it. If we could get ships riding up the N1, that might be interesting, but we can't do that. And I don't want to talk about air because it's a specialized mode in the greater scheme of things. So first of all, it's around the efficiency of a mode and how much the government and private sector in partnership, which we haven't quite got right, is prepared to invest into that mode, to look after the efficiencies for the benefit of everybody, not just certain operators. And then secondly, it's around making sure that just like this table, the playing field is level, that the rules that are in play, and we've got plenty of rules, we call it legislation, we call it policy, we call it best practices in some areas, like in the fuel industry, there are far more rules that apply in there outside of government regulation. But that this playing area is level and everybody plays by the rules. We haven't got that right either. So now you have these huge discrepancies between certain sectors or certain infrastructure pieces in this jigsaw puzzle of logistics chains, and in terms of how operators or people who ply their business in these chains operate and what they do in terms of what is required and not allowed.
I love how you took a 14-day thing and you summed it up in a very...
That was just the first paragraph.
Gareth, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so certainly I think, from an infrastructure perspective, if you bring it back to, as Gavin put it so well, the modes of which people utilize to move goods. I think not only is it about the modes and the legislation around the usage of those modes, it's about saying, well, what modes should be more efficient as well, and how do we then promote those modes, and how do we then look after the individuals and create the right partnerships, collaboration, systems, technologies, whatever else it may be, to try and support what should technically be a primary mode. So certainly certain commodities should be able to be moved on certain modes, certainly more efficiently than others. And that's where I think a lot more thought needs to go into the total chain and the total overall supply chain within any country, not necessarily just South Africa and Africa. But you really need to look at the type of product, the type of, or the mode that should be utilized for that product versus what is currently being used for that. And then instead of investing in just a particular mode because it is the best way currently, it's more around what should we evolve it into to be the most effective and most efficient, as well as deliver the best kind of cost to serve with regards to those sort of products and that sort of environment.
But let's talk a little bit about regulatory complexity and enforcement. So now, how do regulatory complexity and varying enforcement practices affect day-to-day operations and planning in the logistics sector?
If you make regulations too involved and too difficult, generally, I don't think it's only in South Africa, but you see South Africans, as soon as something becomes difficult to comply with or onerous to comply with, they dump it. They move away, they find ways of, in South Africa we have a saying, a boer maak 'n plan, which in English is a farmer makes a plan, or you make a plan to get around it, to get past the hurdle, to find a way to get through the hurdle or under the hurdle. So when it's very complex, and that complexity takes away from the efficiencies, because that's what we're about efficiencies and the ease of doing business, then it gets ignored. But layer on top of that, so let's look at something quite simple in the road freight logistics area, which is the movement of what we in South Africa call abnormal loads. Around the world they call them oversized loads or large loads. So loads that traditionally wouldn't be moved by a normal truck. You have to have a truck with a whole lot more wheels. It might need to be wider, lower, longer, whatever the case may be. Very, very clear set of requirements for this. Yes, you can move whatever you need to move. Go and get a permit from your local province. They'll issue you with a permit. And if you meet the requirements for this specific load, so let's say, for example, this is a 100-ton load, which you wouldn't put on a normal truck because it can't carry 100 tons of payload. It can carry maybe 28, 32, depending on what you've got. If you've got a vehicle that can spread the mass, the weight of this load across its axles so it doesn't do road damage, we'll give you a permit and you can move. You would think that you would be able to apply for this online. I would think you can apply for this online. I mean, come on, how difficult is this? I can give you all the information. I can tell you where I want to go to, where I'm coming from. If you want to have information about the load, I can get that from the guy who's asked me to move it. This is not mine. Generally, 9 times out of 10, it's not my load. I'm moving for a customer. It takes 3 or 4 days to get this permit. And in South Africa, we've got 9 provinces, and if you really got your trip bad and you go through all 9, well, that's on you. But quite often, you would need to go through at least 2. Sometimes it's 4 or 5. And if you're moving something from one of the harbors, like Unitrans does, and you want to take it up through to Zambia or something, you're going through 5 provinces. Because believe it or not, there's a little piece of Mpumalanga that's just between Gauteng and KZN. And you've got Limpopo. You have to get one of these permits from each one of these provinces. Now, to get these guys who issue the permits, who are absolutely diligent in how fast they work for you, to understand that there's actually a timeline here. As you move through the province, you'll need the next permit for this province and the next permit for this province. Otherwise, your vehicle stands at this invisible border between the provinces because you don't have this permit to move through this province. If you make this process onerous with a whole lot of requirements, why can't I submit all my documentation to a single point where all the provinces are, where I declare I'm moving through KZN, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, Limpopo, etc., all the provinces can see it and say, okay, cool, chaps, here's your fee, you've got your permit, and you can move, one scut, one time. Now I've got to go to 4 or 5 different offices, supply this application, and by Jove, believe it or not, 1 or 2 provinces will have something else they want, over and above what you've brought. Oh no, but you can't move on it this day, or no. So, good legislation, the best of intentions, but it becomes onerous to try and get this through the various guys who are responsible. And then layer on top of that, now I said to you, we're a member organization. One of the biggest problems we have operating on a daily basis is the so-called law enforcement, the traffic police moving out there, who see, in our case, trucks as cash cows. They see the ability to fleece money off the driver, and he's just the driver. He or she's just the driver. It's not their load, not their truck. Well, they're working for someone. Or to take other monies out of this whole process, which they deem necessary for them to perform their task. So if you have onerous requirements and you have a law enforcement process that is open to corruption and coercion, and again, differs. In Gauteng, you require a light for this there, but next door you're not. And if you forget to remove the light, or vice versa actually, you forget to remove the light off your vehicle. So Unitrans is involved in lots of mining. In Gauteng, you're required to have an orange lamp on top of your vehicle, and in Mpumalanga. But by Jove, in Mpumalanga, don't leave the mine with this orange light still on the top of your vehicle, then they fine you for an unauthorized lamp. You're coming out of a mining area, you're going probably to another mining area, So you have all of these things that start to play, and that's where what starts to happen is that people start saying, well, I'm not going to comply with this, or this is absolute rubbish. And you end up wasting time trying to get administrative things in place that should really just be simple and straightforward.
If you take what Gavin said and compound that throughout operations across the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, and you look at then legislation and rules in Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Madagascar, Lesotho, Eswatini, each comes with its subtle nuance as well. So if you take the simplicity, and it's a stupid example of a pencil, and you're trying to import a pencil into a country, is it stationary, or is it a wood product and a lead product? And how do you declare that? One country might see it as one aspect, and the other might see it as another. So when it comes to regulatory compliance and effectively declarations and paperworks and the complexity within what is required, most certainly the more complex you make it, the less likely people are to articulate it well enough and utilize it effectively, and they'll work around the system. And then obviously when working around the system, that opens it up for the law enforcement agencies to then find ways in which to find errors within what you do. So the reality is that regulatory should be compliant to a point, and that's got to also look at from a governance perspective, not only the product but also then from a financial perspective. The kind of intricacies of the foreign, forex and monetary policies with regards to taxes, tariffs, duties, etc. as well on the country's behalf. So those things are necessary, and those things stimulate trade as well. So those are all complexities that if you make it easy to deal with, then people are going to deal with you more often, ultimately. And the easier it is for everybody to understand, the less grey there is in the system within which people can then try to operate within the greyness. So certainly, from a financial perspective as well, and at a working capital level, if you have to work around these sort of delays and these sort of timelines and these sort of regulations impacting on your business, it does create excessive cost from a supply perspective and from a total channel perspective, because effectively you're ultimately going to pay. and the consumer will ultimately pay because those costs just get escalated through the value chain. And then at the same time, with regards to those costs being impacted, you also have a time delay, which means that people actually have to try and create more reserve for more product because of the imbalance of the amount of time it is taking for the product to make its way through the total supply chain. So, it's a significant impact through the entire value chain, both at a cost and a time wastage perspective, and ultimately it hits the consumer.
Within this process that we have, this reality, you start to get players who no longer want to comply with the various things, and they actually subvert and undercut the industry. A good example are the so-called foreign drivers. It's a very emotional thing. Now, no one's saying that foreign people with the right documentation can't work in South Africa. That's what we're saying. So if you've got foreign drivers, for example, I'm picking that because that's topical in this industry, and they have the work permits and what have you, it's fine to employ them. Why? Because they will get the same package deal, for want of a better word, the same benefits is the right word, as a South African citizen. But if I now start employing undocumented foreign individuals who are illegally in the country, and there's a reason why they're undocumented, I can now start running an operation that undercuts to a great degree what the compliant operators are trying to do. And it doesn't matter whether it's in road freight or it's in the bus industry, it doesn't matter. Where you have, and it happens in fuel too. So if I start using bad fuels, fuel can be anything between, depending on the trucks you've got and the type of operation you've got, anything between 33% and 60% of your daily operational costs.
Yeah.
Okay, your vehicles, your routes, blah, 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 blah. Labor can be 48% of your cost. If I can take that 48% and cut it down to an 18% by not following the rules, and if the process to get everything in place, work permits, etc., is so complex and is mired with pitfalls like, well, if you pay me 10 grand, just look at what's coming out now out of Home Affairs. You start finding players in the market who start employing this sort of employee. I'm not being derogatory, that's probably a better way of explaining that. Employing employees that they can pay, instead of the basic of 15 grand a month, per example, they can pay them 3 grand a month.
Good.
What happens to your logistics industry?
Oh, no.
And if I'm going to cut on labor, I may as well cut on safety. I may as well cut on maintenance. I may as well cut on, I'll keep going towards him, on fuel. What stops me from cutting everything back that would normally have in play an operator who plays by the rules, has good standards of safety? Having safe drivers and safe trucks is not cheap, sir. It is not cheap, So that's really the problem, is that if we don't ensure that there's a level playing field, that's the role of government. Not to be a player, to be the referee.
So we spoke a little bit about partnerships earlier on, Gareth, and I think you mentioned collaborations. Tell us, what role do industry bodies and partnerships play in supporting dialogue, alignment, and practical improvements across infrastructure and regulation?
Industry players, or let's call it third parties, interested in the industry that are not necessarily directly commercially involved in the industry, if you'd like to call it that, or at least form a body of, a mutually agreed view for an industry per se, to have constructive discussions with government. I think if you have any one individual leading it, as a singular objective, you might find that it becomes quite commercial in intent rather than industry, benefiting. So having an organisation like the RFA, even though it is private, but then there's also like the NLCC that's been set up. There's other bodies that engage the government and industry to try and find ways in which to make the entire industry more efficient. okay, and also provide better line of sight for everybody within the industry around how things are being managed, how particular channels are being managed, how border posts are being managed, any particular tech innovation that's going, and just keeping everybody on the same level in the same playing field. It's also good for industries to have an agenda around where it is heading to and have a growth objective into the future that we can contribute to with regards to working with government in any format, with regards to public-private partnership and or through any other governing bodies. So I think it's important that there is a mutually beneficial view where you have both industry as well as government and then any other bodies pertaining to that having joint accountability for the success and an overall goal which should be ultimately beneficial to the citizens of any country.
So the RFA, none of the people who work for the RFA, full-time for the RFA, have a transport company. We might have been involved in transport of various facets of transport in our past, but none of us have a transport company that competes with our members. That's important. So there are a number of transport associations in South Africa, there are actually 5, but the RFA is the only one where it is actually independent. It exists as a body staffed by people who don't have transport industries. The others have people who are in the transport sector and who actually have transport companies and are looking for work. One of the challenges that the RFA has, especially from SMMEs and micro, medium type operators, they come to the RFA looking for contracts and looking for work. We don't do that. We don't play in that arena for a myriad of reasons. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, as Gareth said, you need some sort of a grouping of an organization that can speak to government from a collective point of view. So the RFA has 570 odd members, which equates to about 2,500 companies. We can go to government and say that we've spoken to our members about various things, and there are various things that come up. And this is what the road freight industry is suggesting or proposing in terms of this, that, or the next thing. So there are a couple of things. Crossing the borders. When I started working at the RFA, to cross a border, you brought a pack of documents like this to a customs official who sat there. There were rows of customs officials, I don't know if you remember that. And this individual would sit at that border and go through this pack of stuff to try and ascertain what you had on board, what duties were payable, whether you needed SAD 500 documents, say you needed whatever, the sort of clearing. And the trucks would stand at the border for hours, actually for days. You had this driver sitting at the border, and if you sat at the border for 7 days, you still paid the driver. You still had insurance on the vehicle. The vehicle generally went across a border and was coming with a return load, hopefully. So you needed to meet that date, time, whatever, to bring a return load. Otherwise, you lost that load. And try and get that load from that customer again, not going to happen. So the RFA pushed the process of what today is known as electronic clearing or pre-clearing. We'd said there must be a process for those who want to play by the game. That's now moved to, it was called an electronic manifest, I recall that. That document actually was drawn up by the RFA. Today, in 2026, we've got very good relations with SARS Customs. When issues happen at borders, we can not necessarily intervene is not the right term, but we can get involved and do proposals as to perhaps you need to do this, you need to do that. So the RFA goes and speaks on behalf of Unitrans and other operators. It's this association saying, it's all our truckers we want out. So we could fly drivers out, get the trucks later, whatever the case is, get food and water. We can go to people and say, well, we went to people in the local town and said, guys, we need toilets, we need food, we need water, we need security, that sort of thing. So that's really what your industry association needs to do. And then bringing in the EVs and all this type of jazz and saying to government, okay, this isn't, again, a single operator trying to outplay everybody else. This is the future. This is new technology. This is how the game is changing. We require you. Obviously, we speak to people like Unitrans and we get viewpoints in and we go to government and say, okay, how are we going to, from a legislative point of view, from a policy point of view, how are we going to bring these in? Not you necessarily, government is saying, we want to go electric. Okay, so where are the charging stations? Mm-hmm. And who's going to pay for that? You can't expect Unitrans to pay for that. And then everybody else uses it. So when are their trucks going to get to charge? So that's the type of role why you need an association.
Hits the nail right on the head in terms of the need of an organization such as the RFA. Thank you so much, Gareth. Thank you so much, Gavin. Tune in next week as we continue this very interesting conversation about logistics in Africa.